know what I want to start with? I want to start with how grateful I am to Claudio and his team for bringing people together after 5 years and a pandemic. And you're all important, passionate, committed Canadians and committed to our ecosystem. So I really do want to say to you, to your team, I'm grateful for this opportunity to be with everybody, and I'm grateful that you're all here because this is a very important time. So thank you.
Let's start high and work our way down. It's like I can't get a read of where the economy is headed. We thought the Fed was going to cut interest rates half a dozen times this year. Now looks like they might not cut at all. I think I'm going to have to retract something I wrote earlier this year. I said the Fed would cut before the Bank of Canada. That's not going to happen, presumably. Lots of uncertainty. I think people in this room, I certainly would benefit just from your read of where the economy's at and sort of where you see it headed just over the horizon.
Sure. I actually feel like we are headed for an interest rate cut sooner rather than later in Canada. The fear that I have, and I had a couple conversations with people who kind of feel like Tiff Macklem and the Bank of Canada is a villain here, but unfortunately, he's really trying to balance, the inflationary pressure in our country, some of it external, some of it internal, but we've also hired tens of thousands of people into the federal workforce, and that's inflationary. The other problem is because we haven't been supporting our commodity industries, they've been villainized, forest products, energy companies, we haven't got the strong currency that we typically would have at this stage of the cycle. Like our dollar, at this stage of a traditional energy cycle, as an example, would be about 85 to 90 cents. We're sitting at 73. So that's telling a story. And if I'm Tiff, because he's a really thoughtful, forward-thinking guy, I think he's really trying to balance inflation and interest rates and mortgage costs for sure are a big part of inflation. But I think he's nervous that the Canadian dollar could start with a 6 soon. And if we move too quickly on interest rates, we end up with a currency that it's hard enough now if you go with your family to New York or Florida. I mean, it's punishing when it starts with a 6. It's bad at 73. It's really bad at 60. So, I for all you out there, and even some of the politicians, Bank of Canada, we're going to get rid of them. They're doing the best that they can to balance this. And so I actually think that we're in a tougher financial position as a country. I think we're in a bit of a recession here. I think Canada will go first. I think it'll happen in the third or fourth quarter. And the US will probably come in around the same time, as opposed to who leads, who follows.
What story do you think the currency is telling? Pick up on that. What's happening
I was
there?
going to be positive today.
Yeah, well.
My whole thing was going to be all the positivity about prosperity and the future of Canada. The dollar is telling us that our leadership is misguided, that we are spending way more than we have, that our balance sheet is burdened and bloated, and our ability to carry that debt is going to be challenged over the next 2, 3, 5 years because it's predicting the future. Boy, I hope that was diplomatic.
That's pretty good. One last macro question. Seems like we're going through a bit of a famine in the venture investing right now. People are anxious to see a turn. They think, the sense I get from talking to people is maybe the interest rates could be a trigger to get some money back on the field. What do you think? What's explaining the famine, and what might it take to get back to some of the headier times that don't seem so long ago? But
this is not interest rate driven. This is policy and structure driven. If we're going to tell a positive story about Canada, we need to think about who we want to become and then fully support and embrace and move toward the virtuous cycle of investment. So when I think about my years as an asset management guy, I think about one of the smartest investors of all time, which is Charlie Munger. You show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcomes. And we just saw a massive disincentive that has thrown a landmine or a grenade into a world that I really love, I'm passionate about, and I believe in. So let me tell the positive story, Kevin. If I'm being as positive as I can be, and for those of you who were there yesterday, I'm sorry if I repeat myself, I kind of got here, not when I built my first 3 or 4 companies and all that, but as a venture/angel guy, when the next Canada founders came to my office, I was still busy turning around at Sante Wealth Management, and they said, we want you to vet our business plan. And vet usually means we want you to poke holes in it, and then we want to see where we can, make it better. And I have to say, my vision, my view, when I read this, right? You got a Jay Agarwal, you got Tim Hodgson, and raise this at you in your office, and I'm like, okay, I freaking love this. This is the future of Canada. We are going to train, educate, structure, mentor, fund, and launch startups. This is brilliant. And they're like, no, beat the crap out of it. I said, no, I can't beat the crap. I like this too much. And 6 months later, they came back and they said, dude, you were easily the most excited about our mission. Do you think you'd join our board? And then, of course, with that, they're like, and by the way, we could use a little money. So would you mind writing a check? And you know what? I didn't mind, because I'm like, okay, if these guys build that, Canada's going to be on a good track. So when I think about Canada, I do everything, as most CEOs do, in visionary chunks. I go 20 years, 10 years, 5 years, 3 years. So let's make it so simple. How do we build a prosperous Canada? I would have Vision 2034. We're innovation nation. This is what we did when we were going to host the Olympics. We're going to own the podium. And they went out and they built the best ski racers, and we dominated. We were amazing at that Olympics. And then they said, well, frick, if it works for skiing, maybe we try that with tennis. And holy smokes, we went from nobody in the tennis world, sorry to some of the people who were tennis players back in the 50s and 60s, but who remembers any? And I had one, Harry Fauquier, he's a good friend of mine. But who did we become after that period when they said, we're committed, we're going to own the future in tennis? And we've done that. And then what did we do? Well, we're going to do that with basketball. 5 of the top 10 draft picks last year were Canadian. So all it takes is passion and a purpose, instead of throwing a frickin' grenade on an industry that was just starting to go, right? 2010, this is next. 2012 is CDL. Then comes Velocity. Then comes all the other, you have 300 incubators, accelerators. We had no angel investing in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, 0. We had no venture community in Canada. So we started to build one. 2012, we got this. 2014, we're on fire. 2016, 2018. And then around 2019, 20, they started to do all kinds of things to put roadblocks in front of a sector that I think deserves to be heralded, to be supported, and just, honestly, if they do nothing else, just stay the hell out of the way. But they couldn't do that either. They had to show up and say stupid things and scare off investment. So here's my issue. If I think about a prosperous Canada, I think about Innovation Nation 2034. You want to commit to this? First and foremost, listen, if I'm the head of finance, I do not tax anybody with anything that starts with a 5. People subconsciously feel like, okay, that's going too far. So cap it at 49.9%, right? Pretend it's Walmart savings days or something. So capping taxes at 49, capping capital gains at 25. Give people certainty. Not this, well, it could be a 66% inclusion rate, could be 75. We haven't decided yet. Budget's in 4 weeks. So that's not so good either. Give people certainty. So we give them certainty, we give them confidence, we know what incentives drive outcomes. Then you need to think about, what if we want them to keep doing it over a life cycle, right? Because we know a startup is 7 to 12 years on average, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter. Give them an incentive to invest again and again and again. So you put your money at risk. We know there's an 80% failure rate in startup world. I got lucky. Listen, everybody knows I'm the world's luckiest dude. I invested in Michael Katchen. Well, that turned out okay. Then I invested in Daniel Eberhard. I think I was the second check in there. Well, that's not bad. You saw Daniel, the guy's a freaking rock star. And then Borrowell, and now Cap Intel. I've had a lot of good things happen, but that's not usually how it goes. Usually it's a failure, failure, failure. Ooh, I got a winner. So if people are willing to do it over and over and over, keep letting them do it. If I take my money out of a company and I put it into another Canadian startup, I'm willing to bet the farm on next Canada, the next business in Canada. Let me do it without taxing me. So that's what I would do. If I want to make this innovation nation, that's what I would do, because prosperity means massive innovation. You can imagine the bright young minds coming out of Waterloo, Queen's, U of T, Dalhousie, all these. University of Alberta is graduating more AI scientists than anybody can believe. Like DeepMind only had one office outside of head office, and it was in Edmonton, Alberta. Nobody seems to know that, right? We need to support that, right? So if you really want to build an innovation nation, you need to support this, because those kids coming out of those schools, they've got big brains, they're bold, they're ambitious, they've got ideas, and we want to support that. And if you do that, and the capital's here, if the angel structure is here, which it now is, the VC structure wasn't here, but it is now, you've got larger sums of capital, Series A, Series B, probably not C and D yet, but we're maturing, right? We're on our Fund 2 or Fund 3 for Golden Ventures and people like that. Versus, Charles River and Khosla and all those guys are on Fund 23. So they're a little further along. But we're still in the game. We're still there. Because I really believe if we get behind this sector, you want to see innovation that spreads out geographically. We were on that. Skip the Dishes, Winnipeg, Neo, Calgary, Harvest Ventures, Saskatoon. I loved that. I was so into that. Jevon McDonald sold his first business to Salesforce in Halifax, and he's now providing more in the ecosystem. So here's what I think we should be doing. This is a virtuous cycle of investment. When you give out and you do well, having taken that risk, it spirals into the community in the most positive way. The more you invest, the more you support, the more you succeed, you take that money out and you do it again. And you know what else happens? Those founders are super grateful. And they go out and do it again and again. I got a phone call from Michael Katchen a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. He goes, Joe, miss you. Got an idea. Let's hear the idea. Gonna build something with Rachel. It's called Simple Ventures. I said, you're gonna do what? Yeah, we're gonna build 10 new startups in this country, companies that are awesome around the world. They don't exist in Canada. I said, done. How much do you need? I just don't do that for anybody. But I'm like, he's like, this is possibly the shortest conversation I've had in months. I said, but I love you. And I know Rachel, she's a rock star. And I know what you're going to do is you're going to feed the virtuous nature of our industry, of our ecosystem. And I just thought that was brilliant. So of course I'm going to support that. And so is Michael. And so are all kinds of other people that are investors in it. I know Harley's in it. I think Som's in it. There's a whole bunch of guys that want this to keep going. And so why does this matter? Because you don't create one company with hundreds of jobs. You create an entire ecosystem with dozens, hundreds, thousands of companies, if you don't blow it, with tens of thousands of jobs. And then people are beating a path to your door. So yeah, we start with good angels and VCs, but big international money starts to come to Canada. Silicon North. That's what was happening. A lot of the big US money, fine. When the ecosystem starts going, money starts to follow. Local money, North American money, global money. But when you throw a grenade, it stops. And then the sign goes out, we're maybe not open for business. It didn't work in Venezuela, I'm not sure it's going to work here. So, sorry, probably shouldn't have said that, but.
It's the easiest interview I've ever done. It's like pulling a cord. Let's work on a prosperity plan then.
Yeah.
So I guess first thing we do is throw the grenade back out of the boat, right? But
I think the first thing you do, Kevin, is you say, we're in this together. We're committed. And this is our vision, right? Like any business leader, when I get behind somebody, when I was talking to Keisha earlier, it's always the same. I look for somebody with a great vision, tons of integrity, character, drive, and I look at the team they put around them. If they've hired A's, if I love the character of that leader, and I love the quality of their team and smart capital, I'm all in. That's what we need to start with. We need a vision for Canada in 2034, and then how are we going to get there? You set that, you set the tone. You set the tone, the money will follow.
can you get there with the tax structure the way it is now? I mean, could we leave the capital gains changes that have been put in place alone and find ways to offset that?
Can you? Yes, maybe. Have you diverted energy, attention, capital away? Because capital doesn't like uncertainty. Mm-hmm. And it really doesn't like political uncertainty. So I think it's possible. I think it's still doable. But it's not as likely as it was 5 years ago. And it's not just this one thing, right? There's a whole series of events that led to this, and there's a whole series that's going to come.
What are the other events that are important?
I think we've stopped believing in this ecosystem as much as we were. Okay. It started strong. I thought Navdeep Bains, when he was minister, did a really good job articulating the commitment and the story, but that story went away, and I don't want to get too political. So I'm trying to say only nice things about our leaders.
Okay. Well, there goes that. So what else then? I mean, I like this idea. I wrote something similar to this, or along this line of thinking not so long ago. I do think that a strategy of some kind would help. I also agree with what you said about Bains when he was in industry. It did feel like at least they thought they had a strategy in place. Certainly doesn't feel like that today. So what else is missing? Do we just need to go back to 2015, 16 and get back and press reset, or are there things that we need to do from this stage to stay on that 2034 mission that you're talking about?
Yeah, I think we need to go back, or we just need to reboot. Mm-hmm. We need to say, you know what? Maybe we stumbled here, but we believe. As we move away from all the industries that we think are terrible and awful, but happen to create Canada for us, like our metals, minerals, energy, and forest product companies, we've kind of forsaken them a little bit. But let's say we're moving to this new tech, AI, innovation era. I think we need to say, this is our future. This is the future of our country. We're all in on Canada. We're all in on keeping that brain drain from happening again. Because honestly, that brain drain that we had in the 90s and 2000s became the brain gain. I loved that. And now we're draining again a little bit. I don't want that. So there has to be something that says we're committed. You need the country to say we're committed. You need the industry to say we're committed. I think you can even get the oligopolies in a room and say we're committed. I know them all. They really individually really believe in what was happening and what was being started. And I still spend a lot of time with them on it. So they're not bad people. They're not ill-intended, but they have their responsibility, which is to their shareholders and to their employees. And they know how to, lobby, and they know how to keep their guard up a little bit. But they have been helpful too. Savvy, one of the companies I was helping before I got bought by Questrade, had a really deep inroad into CIBC. We were doing a lot with them. And Cap Intel is deeply embedded now into Investors Group and CI Financial and so on. So they're getting runway, they're getting traction.
Okay. I've got more questions, but the mic is roaming again as it has been. So if anybody has some questions for Joe, please put up your hand. And only 15 minutes left, so you can get your question in because Joe will let it rip as we've seen. So one big change though, Joe, from the era we're talking about, 2016, 2017 to now, a couple of big changes. One, back then is still ZIRP, right? So interest rates are still basically zero, and at least we had expectation of them staying near zero for a while. That world presumably is gone. And also, the federal government at least felt like it had some money to spend, and it spent it. Now it seems to acknowledge that the credit card is maxed out, which is one of the reasons that they've decided to try to raise some revenue in this last budget, because they decided one of their priorities was to stay on their fiscal track, as wobbly as it might be to a lot of people. So is that an issue? Like, how do we do your 2034 mission without money and with higher interest rates?
So higher interest rates undoubtedly make the cost of capital higher, and that makes it a little trickier. But if you don't have other disincentives, I still think the motivation is there. The belief in the future is there. The belief that the cycle for interest rates is going to roll over here. And if I were to predict the future in terms of inflation and interest rates in 2025, 2026, I see inflation down below 3% and interest rates down around 3% or lower. So I don't think we're going to zero. I don't know that we should go to zero. You could say that was animal spirits was partly because the cost of capital was so low, but also the innovation ecosystem was robust. All these accelerators and incubators were getting started. The universities were putting money behind them. Foreign capital was coming in. There was a lot of cool stuff going on here, and it was self-perpetuating. So I wouldn't say it's all interest rate driven. It was policy, it was commitment, it was the media. Everybody was getting behind the future of innovation in Canada. And that just sort of came to a halt. And they diverted capital and they diverted their focus away. So, yeah.
Okay. Question back here. Okay.
Hi there, it's Lisa Cashmore. I'm a partner at Regenerative Capital Group. I have a question. When I think of 2034 and 10-year plan, it's a bit of a diversion, so it's a bit of a different kind of question. But when I think of entrepreneurship and national prosperity and the next 10 years and the business succession issue we're going to have, and that I haven't heard that come up at all in the last 2 days, but if I think of 76% of our SMEs are going to change hands due to retirement in the next 10 years, and 91% don't have a succession plan, I'm just curious if you have an opinion or thought on how we might manage that as a country, because that could actually have a pretty detrimental impact on our economy if we don't have people ready to buy those companies and lead those companies to the next level. And it's a great opportunity from a tech perspective because many of those companies haven't fully digitized. So there's lots of opportunities to insert tech to grow those companies, but they're sort of those non-sexy businesses we don't talk about a lot amongst this group of people. So I'm curious if you have an opinion on that or how we might manage that.
So Lisa, I think that's a great question. I think it's something we absolutely need to think about. But one of the things that I know for sure is if those businesses aren't passed down to the next generation, let's say the next generation has moved on with their life, and that's fine. I really believe in a more libertarian, capitalistic environment, And often what you find is money finds a way to those companies that have value where the investor, whether it's private equity or venture or some individual or a strategic, that says, I can see how 1 + 1 can equal 5. And again, money will follow the opportunity and the vision for that company. So if I'm that person, or if I'm that graduate from a university that says, I see that business that's been stagnating around 4 or 5 million in revenue, and I think by bringing my technology, my leadership, my rebranding, and some new capital behind that company, I can make that 5 million a 25 million or a $500 million company. And it's much easier to attract capital to a business that has a trajectory of revenue and earnings. So I believe that money's going to find its way into those businesses, and then it's up to the founder or the CEO to decide, is it going to the next generation, is it going to a strategic, or is that capital going to go into my business, and maybe I'll ride along, I'll do a VTB, I'll take equity, or I'm just going to go home. I'm just going to go away and I'm going to enjoy my winters, and this young person or the new owner is going to take it to the next level. I'm not worried about that so much. But it's a great question, and it is going to happen. It's inevitable, and that just means there's tons of opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I know of at least one private equity firm that's out rolling up those kinds of companies now. I'm sure it's not alone. And then I know of another venture fund who's got its eye on those types of companies, but intends to invest in insert all kinds of the latest tech, which these companies aren't doing now because of their life cycle, right? Because they're about to retire. So why would you go into AI when you're 65 and figure you have 1 or 2 years left? So just to echo what you said, I anecdotally hear of stories like this, that it does seem like capital will find those businesses if they're worth investing in, for sure. But I also know that policymakers think about that a lot, especially in Quebec, where I'm based. It's something they spend a lot of time thinking about. Question here.
So, Joe, we talked a little bit yesterday about, you haven't been so much as lucky about investing in these companies, but knowing kind of the regulations that don't make sense in some of our financial services. We talked about sort of somebody in financial services like Tomy and Layer 6 now moving into healthcare and AI. Can you talk about, you've taken all of this learning in finance and regulation. Is that going to carry over to prosperity around healthcare and regulations, or what do you think about that?
It's not that I have learning, it's that I identify winners, people that I believe have a track record of success, they're great leaders, they have a compelling vision, and I put leader before vision, because you can always pivot. They've got great teams. So when Tomy called me, and so for those of you who don't know, I invested in a company that Tomy and Jordan Jacobs were building called Layer 6. And they've done great things, right? They've built the Vector Institute. They built just off the side of just for something nice to do for Canada. Seriously. Tomy basically gets bought out for $100 million by TD. He's working his tail off trying to make them an AI-driven bank, and he did. And he's building Vector Institute to be nice with Ed Clark and a couple other guys, and Jordan, and Jeffrey Hinton. And then they go and build Radical, and he was basically sleeves up helping Radical, and he's got 2 kids and a wife who's a surgeon. And you're just like, really? When does this dude sleep? So, do I love him? I love him. And when he called and said, so I'm building this company called Signal One. Actually, I'll tell you the story because it makes me laugh all the time. He goes, so I'm building this company. I said, what does it do? He tells me. I said, well, Tomy, sounds like another winner. He goes, well, we don't have much room. TD was so happy with the way I left them and the way I supported them. They're letting me lift out 20 of my top machine learning AI scientists. When does that ever happen? And they're putting most of the capital in, but I have room for 4 investors. Jeffrey Hinton, Nadir Mohammed, one other guy, I forget who it was, and you. And I'm like, you didn't just use my name in the same freaking sentence as Nadir and Jeffrey Hinton. I said, what are you trying to butter me up? I said, you just tell me how much you need and I'm gonna do it. Because there are people that are winners. They have all the elements to build great companies, and they do it with passion and purpose, not to get rich. Because he doesn't need to work anymore. But he does because he's that person. That's why it all comes back to the character and integrity of the founder. Because you show me a great character-driven founder, I show you a team that follows that person wherever they go, and they do great things. They leave a great legacy. And I'm telling you, when I think about this Innovation Nation 2034, I think about where the heck is our Tesla? Where is our Google? Where is our Amazon? They're gonna be here if we get behind it and support it. But we got behind it for 12, 15, 19. You can't do that. You can't stunt the growth of an industry, because then the big money's going to come in and buy out those guys that you heard today at 500 million, 900 million, and you're not going to end up with this unicorn group that is going to be the future of the country. And again, that's me being super positive, because we don't need to have that happen. We didn't need to get in our own way. Just stay out of the way. Let these guys do what they do.
It's probably going to be the last question, though we can probably squeeze in one more if there's somebody that is not the last question. Okay.
But I have one more thing to say. I'm just kidding.
I was really going to put him on the spot, though.